This is Renaud, Anjoran, and I'm going to interview Fredrik Gronkvist from Product Maker. Actually, Fredrik has been on the show a few times. He's been involved over the years in helping companies source new suppliers, ensure compliance. We've talked a few times about compliance of products to go into the EU and the US. He's got a website about that. It's compliancegate.com. But today we're here to talk about one of his latest projects called Product Maker. And we'll send a link to that website in the show notes. It's spelled Product Maker, MKR. Okay, mkr.com. And the whole topic is on near sourcing from countries in Europe and Turkey, and sort of comparing it with sourcing from suppliers in China mainly, and Vietnam and some other Southeast Asian countries. Hi, Fredrik. How are you doing?
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, welcome to the show. So, can you tell us maybe in a few words? I mean, what have you been up to with this project? What does it consist of? How basically what have you been doing here? And what is it specifically about European and Turkish manufacturers?
Well, you would have to add Mexico to that list. So Europe, Turkey, and Mexico. And this, I had this idea, this vision in the first few months of the pandemic in, what could it be, May 2020, that this is not enough information about how you go about finding suppliers and quality assurance and so on and so forth, VAT, import taxes, when you manufacture in Europe, Turkey, and Mexico, closer to home for European, British, and American and Canadian businesses, which is really our audience, right, with ComplianceGate and so on. And this really then took off because, as you know, in late 2020, the freight rates exploded. Absolutely obscene amounts you had to pay for a 20-foot container. And all of a sudden, the calculation started to change. It became reasonable to manufacture, say, in Portugal as an alternative to Vietnam or China. Interest increased. Then freight rates went down, and interest is perhaps not as intense now as it was then. But I still believe in this, and we developed this into a supply directory, and that's what we're focusing on right now.
Nice. So okay, that Mexico, I guess, mostly for North American buyers, and then for European buyers, then that's EU and Turkey. And by the way, I noticed a number of American companies that try to find other sources far away from China have also started to buy more from the EU. I don't know if you've seen the same thing. And it seems like the big players are Poland, Portugal, and Turkey. Well, have you seen the same thing?
I don't have data on that, so I'm not going to sit and say that I've seen that specific pattern. We do have US companies that sign up to our supplier database subscription, if I can use that term, but we don't really reach out and ask them where they're buying from. So I don't know if they use to find suppliers in Mexico or in Europe, to be honest. Maybe right. We should do some kind of survey, but we're not there yet.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's for a follow-up episode, right? So let's get into it, because the main topic that I want to cover is about the how does it compare, right? You look into near sourcing from these countries, obviously for the market, for the markets of let's say Europe and USA and Canada. How does it compare against China? So there's basically three big measurable indicators, right? It would be the unit price, but also the lead time and the minimum order quantity. How do you see the difference? And maybe it's very product specific. I'm not sure. What have you found?
So this is something where we actually have data, and we did our first case study of price research in late 2021, and that concerned baby clothing, baby blanket, baby romper, and so on. Organic cotton got certified, organic cotton to be specific. So we're comparing apples and apples and not different fabric qualities. So the primary challenge with manufacturing in Europe is often to find a supplier with Euro pages, but let's say that's not exactly Alibaba. Nothing really compares to Alibaba when it comes to supply directory. But Alibaba can be quite meager for many product categories in Europe. Now, in this case, we had the luxury of accessing the GOTS supply database, meaning that we could use the GOTS organic cotton supply database to find supplies both in China and in various European countries. So that was the first challenge that we were facing. The second challenge was
just for people to understand. So it's you mean that these suppliers are actually sort of certified as using that specific type of fabric, right?
Exactly. So this concerns suppliers that are certified as GOTS manufacturers for organic cotton. So we had a starting point. The second challenge where we see differences is in the response rate. Let me put it this way. European suppliers can be far more conservative than those in China. What I mean by that is you contact a supplier using a Gmail address, you might have already lost, they might not even bother responding to you. We saw that the response rate was around 35% for European suppliers, where in China around 50%, meaning that Chinese suppliers tend to be a bit more eager. This matters. If you don't get a quote, we don't get an attracted quote, it could be a situation where you can't even move forward suppliers. You need more preparation for the EU. I can get to that later.
Yeah, just to comment on that. Yeah, what we've seen, and you've seen that also, right? Is that a lot of Chinese suppliers will have an army of salespeople on commission, right? And then they pay Alibaba, whatever, they get some inquiries, then they put the people on it, and they say, go ahead and try to be more aggressive. Basically, that's the Chinese approach. Quite different in Europe. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
I also think this could at least in part be explained by the fact that Chinese suppliers they are so accustomed to using, say, the Alibaba RFQ systems. They spend time behind the computer responding to potential customers in a way that many European suppliers are not accustomed to. I think this also applies to some extent also to those in Mexico and in Turkey. At least in our experience, the response rate is lower compared to China. So it might sound like a minor thing, but it's not. It's really one of the key challenges, and perhaps the number one complaint that I contacted 10 suppliers and nobody responded. So it's a pretty big issue for some companies.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. So that's so what you're saying is that that's actually one very serious let's say indicator to take into account, and companies need to basically be prepared for that, to sell their project, right? To look more professional, to look more like an established company, to look like a real inquiry that will lead to real profitable business, not a very tiny order. Is that the kind of implications that this leads to?
Absolutely, and it means that you need to have a clear product specification. You need to communicate potential buying volumes. I think European suppliers are less willing to guess what you want to manufacture. So you need to be very, very clear when it comes to providing a tech pack, artwork, packaging, designs, specifications in general, bill of materials, and so on and so forth. Because that's where I see many potential buyers failing because they just don't get the responses they expect.
Right. Whereas in China, it's going to be, well, they don't specify these things. Okay, let's try to orient them in the direction of one of our existing products or something. The things that we're used to doing, and that's it. If they don't specify, it means we'll have a way out if they're not happy, because we'll be able to say, well, sorry, you didn't tell us about that. Whereas in Europe, and not just in Europe, but the approach might be a bit different. Like it's not a good sign, it's a bad sign. Well, this is not a very serious and professional buyer. How come they don't even know these kind of things? We're going to have to educate them. We're going to have to do all kinds of things. And then usually in this case, the business doesn't come to us, it just falls through somewhere, right? Because again, it's not a professional buyer. It's maybe a company just starting, oh, that doesn't smell very good. We're going to waste a lot of time. And it might not be a junior salesperson on commission. It might be actually one of the owners responding to to your emails. So their time is precious, right? Does that ring true? Or?
Yes, and it kind of makes sense given that labor is more expensive in most European countries. So you cannot have people working full time responding to, let's say, buyers that just tire kickers that will not actually buy it. They have to be rational when it comes to prioritizing. It's just how it is.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, what about MOQs, minimum order quantities, I should say, and the lead times? When the market, let's say the market is the EU, I guess that makes an enormous difference, right? I guess that's really one of the key reasons why companies try to do near sourcing, to find suppliers close to their markets.
I can say that it can really go either way. Now, for context, I have lived in mainland China for many years, now based in Hong Kong. So I have a lot more experience manufacturing, working with manufacturing goods in Asia. So got a lot more data on that. Now, looking at Europe and Turkey, as I said, it can really go either way. So in terms of the MOQ, comes down very much to the supplier. I would say that when it comes to the very low volumes, Chinese suppliers tend to be more open for that, but then you're very limited. You might be a print shop, just standardized goods that would otherwise go on AliExpress or something like that. And in Europe, you also have suppliers that are specialized, say, in selling 300 to 500 pieces per garment, if we're talking textiles, right? So it exists. Different suppliers are specialized in different quantities, I would say. Then you also have access to wholesalers in the EU if it comes to, let's say, non-OEM or non-custom design products, right? Which can sell you anything from a single unit and up. It really depends on the industry. The boring answer is that it really varies depending on the supplier, what the market that they are targeting. And I can't say that I have seen like a clear-cut pattern that I can see here today and say, yes, the MOQs are lower in China, or the MOQs are lower in Portugal, or something like that. That's the honest answer.
20 years ago, it was different, but now there's just so much competition between Chinese suppliers. You can negotiate nearly anything you want, as long as they can satisfy the minimum order quantities of their own suppliers, right? Otherwise, it becomes a little bit more difficult, but then still there are ways to negotiate. Maybe pay them some extra deposit so they can buy in larger quantity, and then you consume it over several batches and so on. A lot of buyers have become pretty good at handling that. But what about the lead times? Now, are you about to say that you don't see a clear difference? So
Well,
there's got to be a difference, right?
if I go back to the case study, the research we did in 2021 for the baby garments, in that case, we could see that EU suppliers, now we're talking GOTS suppliers, had an average MOQ of 925 pieces. This was increased by a couple of suppliers that had a higher MOQ, whereas in China it was 2,500 pieces. It was significantly higher in China in that specific case. So yes, sometimes it really depends on the industry. It really depends on the supplier. So in this specific case, we did see that. Now, looking at lead times, there is a distinct advantage when it comes to the delivery time in the EU and Turkey. You can ship something from Istanbul to Sweden, where I come from, in less than a week. You could do the same thing with air freight from China, but that's going to cost you more. Truck,
Of course.
like
Yeah, truck is much
over
cheaper.
land, then it is
Yeah.
significantly cheaper, and you save that time. The option would likely have been ocean freight from here, right, to most European countries. And given, factoring in delays, it's not going to take a week. It's very often, at least in Scandinavia, it can be 5, 6, 6, 7 weeks sometimes if you factor in delays, unloading, and so on and so forth. So that's a drastic reduction, and that matters when you need to restock. However, when it comes to the manufacturing time, I would say it's been just about the same, be it manufacturing in Turkey, Europe compared to China. And if we go into delays, been about the same, I would say. So the manufacturing
Okay.
time seems to be about the same,
Interesting.
but end of the day,
Okay.
you can really shave off at least a month in lead time just because the delivery is so much faster. That makes a big difference, especially when you need to restock, especially when you're building a brand or you're testing out a new product line, right? If it's a 2-month lead time compared to, say, 3.5, maybe 4 months, that's a big difference. That means you can get away with keeping less stock. That's better cash flow. That's less inventory. So that's really one strong reason for manufacturing in Europe or Turkey if you are based in the EU or the UK.
Well, plus, if you get a batch of, maybe a container of products from China and you see a lot of them are defective, what do you do? Then it's very painful and it's going to take a long time to get it fixed. Whereas open the truck, you say, well, it's no good, send it back to Romania. I'm not picking on Romania, okay, or whatever, to Portugal, to Spain, okay. They if it's really their fault, okay, they will hurry up to rework it and send it back to you, and maybe you lost what 1 week maybe, right? Whereas with China, it's more like 3 months and a lot of aggravations. That's got to count also. It's really the risk, the impact of mistakes is much lower. I would say. I mean, yeah. Talking about risk, um, I think especially for companies that sell on the U.S. market, there's got to be a big driver, which is don't produce in China, right? Slap a label that says made in whatever, made in Poland, made in Turkey, has to make them feel much safer, doesn't it?
Yeah, as long as it's actually manufactured there. But yeah, I get the point. In the US, it's a different calculation because you have the tariffs, and they might go up even further. We'll see how the end of the year what the situation will be. I would like to comment on what you mentioned about the risk. Well, the risks when you buy from suppliers in Europe or Turkey compared to China. We have been dealing with quality issues. In all cases, the suppliers have been, let's say, forthcoming, and they have informed us about potential quality issues. At the same time, I would say the Chinese suppliers are way better now than they were 10 years ago. So it's been a pretty
Yeah,
dramatic
that's
improvement
true.
in the way the Chinese suppliers are communicating potential quality issues and so on. That could also be the result of we working with companies like yours, right? We work with Sofeast, we get things quality inspected, we have these order term sheets and so on. We do lab testing and so on. So yeah, okay, maybe it's related to that, the fact that we do have a strict quality assurance procedure, but we do have the same also when it comes to manufacturing projects in Europe and Turkey, and that's also what I advise our customers, that you don't want to return anything because that could still be an issue if it turns out that you as the buyer, you didn't specify the Pantone color, or you got the unit wrong in a tech pack, then they're not going to remake it for free anyway. So quality inspections are important even when you manufacture in, say, Portugal, just to be clear about that. There is another element, though, where manufacturing closer to home really makes things easier, and that is a compliance aspect. Compliance is a big part of what we do at Compliance Gate, right? But it's actually everything we do at Compliance Gate. But the difference is that when you manufacture in China, because China is not part of the EU. It's not part of the United States. It's its own sovereign country, right? They have their own regulations. They have their own substance restrictions and so on and so forth. So this means that you really need to educate your supplier on, you need to follow this requirement. You need to make sure that this fabric or this plastic or whatever is compliant with the REACH regulation or the POP regulation and so on and so forth. You cannot always assume that everything made in Europe is always compliant, but it tends to be easier. Now, in the case of, say, Portugal, many manufacturers in the textiles industry, just to give you an example, they tend to be able to provide Oecotec standard 100 documentation for the fabrics. And this means that you could potentially save 500 to 1,000 USD or euros per SKU in testing fees. So that's a difference.
Yeah, that makes sense.
More responsibility on them. So it's less risky and costly to verify compliance when you manufacture within, say, the EU.
So yeah, I think just to clarify, yes, if you sell product in the EU and the product is really made in the EU, you as the brand owner or whatever, the e-commerce supplier or the retailer, whatever, you are not considered the manufacturer because you have not brought that product from outside of the EU like you do. Like if you buy something in China, you slap your own logo and brand everywhere. You don't mention the manufacturer name anywhere. No, you're considered the manufacturer, and that's it. The buck stops with you, right? Whereas in the EU, it can be different. The ultimate responsibility doesn't necessarily fall onto you. Is that what you had in what you were explaining?
That specific case when I think that would also apply in the EU, that say I'm in Germany and I have this, say, I go to an electronics manufacturing services company in Poland and I tell them put together this device. I'm still a manufacturer in that case. The difference is that they know what CE marking is. They know the basics of standards. They can provide input, or maybe they have substance documentation to give you an idea. So that's the difference. That they have more experience. They are based in the EU, more experience with this. Also, if you look in Turkey, many of them are very oriented towards exports to the European Union. So this means that they, on average, tend to be more aware of this. And you can also take, let's say, the cosmetics industry in the EU. You can go to cosmetics manufacturing company in, say, Germany or Italy, and they have these standard formulas. You just put your label on it, which a lot of influencers, they do just that. And these companies, they know the cosmetics product regulations in the European Union in and out. They even help you with the labeling. So of course this varies depending on the industry, but you can often get more compliance support, and that can really make a huge difference.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense, yes. I was thinking before the call, okay, what kind of product is this better suited for, right? And my theory is that if a lot of the components are going to come from Asia, might not be great, but if a lot of the components and materials can be sourced locally, that certainly can make a huge difference. Does that make any sense?
Yes, but at the same time, most of our customers wouldn't really be very concerned about where the fabric is from, or if they have an electronic device with components from China, that would not really be an issue for them. I don't think any of our customers that use our supply database have really been concerned with the component origin in that sense. More like final really assembly or manufacturing.
It's not really thinking are they concerned. I was thinking along the lines of if there's a minimum order quantity on the components, made in China, well, it's going to be the same one probably in China and in, let's say, Portugal anyway, because they have to buy, I don't know, at least that many, PCB or whatever, right? Or the cost of the mold, if the mold for the plastic enclosure it's going to be made around Shenzhen anyway. It's going to be roughly the same lead times to get it made and validated and trialed and everything. I mean, anything that leads back to China is going to lead to the same kind of conditions, right? If the fabric is dyed in a Chinese fabric mill, then that's what we see a lot in countries like Vietnam or Bangladesh, etc. Well, it all comes from China, so there's the same conditions as China in terms of MOQ and lead time and everything, plus a longer lead time because we need to get it from there, right? So it's always something that we kind of ask, okay, where does this come from and where is this made and so on, right? And I would ask the same kind of questions from a Turkish supplier or a Polish supplier.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if you go and you say I need need this PCB, and they need to get it made in Dongguan, yes, of course you're going to have to meet the MOQ in Poland as much as you would have to meet the MOQ if you're manufacturing, doing final assembly in Shenzhen, right? But there's a lot of say metal fabrication companies in say Poland, in Estonia, and so on and so forth that makes injection molds, plastic injection molds, also in the EU. So there's no real shortage of that. The same thing goes for machining or sheet metal, metal laser cutting, welding services, and so on and so forth. So if you want, you can have all that made in Europe. And that's what many of our customers do. When it comes to things like cosmetics, then I don't know the origin of those chemicals. But many European manufacturers are quite big companies, and they do tend to have components and materials in stock, just like you would have in China. And they say that you go to a garment manufacturer in Portugal, we have never been in a situation where they have been forced to like, okay, we've got to wait another 2 months because we need to order this material from Asia. That is not something we have really encountered. Likewise, if it would be, say, a wooden chair. It's supposed to be made in Romania. Romania is a really interesting country for all sorts of wooden crafts, by the way. We haven't really had that issue either. So I'm sure if you ask me in a couple of years, then maybe I would have seen more of a pattern like that, but it hasn't really been an issue, I would say, like importing. Now with Vietnam, yes, I am fully aware of that, and it's not just from China, but also from India, and then it's because Vietnam is so close to China, so I think that makes sense. I haven't really encountered a situation where we had to wait for a European or Turkish supplier to start production because they need to buy the material from East Asia. That's not an issue we've been having.
Okay,
that's a long answer.
Yeah, no,
I'm sure it can. I'm sure it happens. I'm sure it happens. We have not had that experience, so that's all I can say really.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. What I've heard from relatively large companies is that when they started to, a lot of European retailers started to buy more from Turkey, from Poland, etc. over the past 10 years, right? So they started to put a small sourcing office there, right, on the ground. And what I've heard repeatedly is that they have to rethink their approach, right? I even remember someone from Kingfisher, so a big do-it-yourself, retail chain, let's say. They put in place, I think it's in Warsaw. They have a buying office, and then they say like, well, the cultural shock, going back to Europe was huge, and we had to rethink a lot of the processes, etc., etc. Chinese suppliers and also in Vietnam, etc., are kind of used to a certain jargon and to certain way of working. Whereas you go into Europe, it's much less sort of standardized. There's much less, I don't know, awareness and maybe compliance with certain, how would I say that? Yes, like a standard way of working that all suppliers say, okay, yeah, I recognize it. this is the way to go. And even things like, oh, we're going to do a final inspection based, with acceptance sampling based on AQL. And like in China, everybody would say, oh, yeah, no problem. AQL, well, 2.5 for major. Okay, no problem. Blah, 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 And you go to a lot of countries, a lot of suppliers in Europe, and they were like, what is that? Like, just tell me what you want and tell me roughly what you can accept. And, we'll do it. But you don't tend to think and speak of the same things in the same terms. Have you seen some of that?
I can say that I've been taking the same approach dealing with European and Turkish manufacturers as we do when we deal with Chinese or Vietnamese companies, meaning that we give them a pretty clear set of order terms, milestones, making it clear that they will get deposit payment, but the remaining 70% or 50% is released when compliance is verified, when quality has been verified, meaning through a third-party inspection. And I would never negotiate on that. Doesn't matter where they are located. I would never negotiate on that. And haven't really been any arguments around that either, to be honest. A difference would be, in my opinion, would be, say, that it's more common for suppliers here in Asia to conform to, say, BSCI or SEDEX audits and so on, SA 8000, because that is something that big retailers in the US and Europe and Japan and so on, they expect that. So they dictate the terms. You want to sell to us, you need to pass through this audit. And you also have companies like Disney or Walmart, right? They have their own auditing protocols. And then these companies, you find them on Alibaba, they use that as a feather on the hat, if you know what I mean. Like they show, well, we got the BSCI audits, you can verify that here, or maybe something like ISO 9001 quality management system, or 14001 for environmental management. Whereas in Europe, it's much more rare, and I think one reason for this could potentially be that company in Portugal, they kind of have to comply with everything that is in BSCI by law anyway, because you have fairly high condition, like requirements that concern labor conditions in the EU. So that could be a difference. I'm not sure if that's what the question was relating to, but when it comes to the actual procedure, we just follow the same as we do with Chinese or Vietnamese factories.
Yep.
There's no real difference.
Yep.
I would not tolerate any company telling me that, no, you can't do testing, no, you should not do quality inspections.
Right. Yeah, no, I get. Yeah, when it comes to ISO certificates and things like that, yeah, China very fast, boom, became the number one country in a number of certified companies and so on. And well, anyway, the certifying industry here is a bit messed up, as you know, so it doesn't mean that much. But they see it as a cost of doing business, a cost of sales. Basically, is marketing, and anything that they see as relatively likely to bring them some customers, more or less directly, they will spend money on, as you know. So yes, in Europe, the focus is definitely not there. That makes sense. Okay, well, I like your answer. Basically, describe clearly how you work, what is your buying process, what is your prototype, pre-production approval processes, etc. Your payment terms, how you're going to ensure that they comply with your standards and with the laws and regulations of the countries where you're going to sell the product, and so on and so forth. Just lay all that out clearly, give them the roadmap. This is how to work with us, and basically, if that works fine in China or Vietnam, that will work fine pretty much anywhere. That's what you've found, right? If I try to summarize it.
Yes. End of the day, be it a factory in China, Vietnam, or Europe, they all speak the same language in terms that they want to make money. So it's not like they're completely different species, and they do understand that brands have quality standards.
Right. Okay, great. Well, that's been quite informative. I think what we should do is please give us some news and come back and talk about what you find, over time, because I'm sure you will have more and more case studies and comparisons and so on to share with us. Where can people know more about the database that you mentioned? So it's productmkr.com. Is
That's
that
right.
correct?
Product maker, productmkr.com. So www.productmkr.com. And there you can
.com.
find the supply
Okay,
database.
right. And if they want to contact you, should they go to their website? Should they look you up on LinkedIn? What is the best?
If you want to reach out to me specifically, then just LinkedIn or the website as well. I will read it one
Yeah.
way or the other.
Okay, great. All right. So yeah, that sounds like a topic we'll come back to. So thanks so much, Fredrik.